I'm a bit nervous to talk about money as a spiritual practice. So you see, I think if I don't start, I won't get myself into trouble. But I've heard from some of you that you've been having some interesting thoughts and conversations with yourself and with some other people about this week's Lenten practice of thinking about money and what we do with our money as a spiritual practice. And at our Monday afternoon and our evening groups where we get together just to talk about our spiritual practices booklet and to think more about it. It's been interesting to hear of people's relationship with money. I think there are other people in this congregation who should probably be talking about this today, because in both the groups, it turns out I was probably the one who was most anxious about money. Have you found out from doing the questions that your early childhood, the family dealings with money and the family experiences with money are really big parts of the attitude that you bring with money into your own adult life. In my family, we were always quite poor, although we were never hungry because we were a farming family and my mom did all the preserves and that. So we always had fresh dill pickle and fruit and so that was good. So I didn't know that kind of hunger. But there was always a palpable anxiety about how to pay the bills, about should they buy this or couldn't they buy this, or would they wait for next month. And because we had our house was heated by a wood fireplace or a wood stove and coal at night. And because I slept in the room that had the chimney that went straight up to the roof, I would hear the evening conversations that were often difficult ones about different ways of spending my parents had. And so I grew up with this great anxiety about money. And that there would never be enough. And that if I wasn't anxious about it just about every day, somehow the bad angels would swoop down and take everything I had. And so there was always just some dire consequence. So of course, you can't live with that level of anxiety for all the time. And so I started to talk to people about anxiety about money and anxiety about the fact that life was not going to turn out well. And I think part of that came from the Depression, People of a certain generation, many of us raised by parents who were alive, or grandparents certainly who were alive during the Depression, told us stories about how just overnight your life could just tumble. And so I learned some things as I've explored my own anxiety around money. I've learned that I'm not the only one that has it. I've learned that if I'm going to be anxious about money, when I have $300 in my bank account. I'm still going to be anxious about money when I have $100,000 in my bank account. So I realized it's not about the money. It's about an anxious approach to life, a fearful approach to life. And so I've been very privileged to be able to deal with that and to look at it and to think about it until the point now where I kind of recognize it. You know, that's the point of therapy, isn't it? It's not that you get over something. It's just that you learn to recognize it and you manage it rather than having it manage you. So now I try to manage my anxiety, my fear that there's not enough, that something catastrophic will happen, and everything will be gone. And I learned, just from exploring my own family system with people who were helpful, that actually my parents had two different responses to the anxiety. One parent said, well, if you never know what tomorrow's going to bring, and if you could lose everything, well, you better spend today. You know, spend it while you got it. And the other one said, well, if it's that precarious, you better sock away as much as you can so that you have the best chance of surviving if you're going to lose everything. So, because I've thought and dealt so much with it in my own life, I've come to recognize the symptoms in congregations. And I've been privileged over my life to get to talk to people who actually weren't afraid of money and who saw money as probably the crucial statement that congregations make about their belief and their belief in the future, about their fears, and about their priorities. So today I want to think about, and I'd like you to think about, what you do with your money and how you live with your money and the kind of emotion that you bring to money, and to see then what is the values, what's the faith, what's the statement that you are making in the way you relate to money and in the feelings that you have about money. And what does that tell you? How does that lead you and guide you to make an intentional approach to the way you deal with money? Because that's all a spiritual practice is. How do you deal with your money in such a way that it nourishes your soul? So that's the one piece. But the second piece is, how do we as a congregation look at and deal with money as our spiritual practice? Because I think it's true that like you each have, as individuals, the capacity to create your own spiritual practices. But as a corporate group, St. Aidan's United Church also practices our spirituality by the way we deal with our money and with the attitudes that we bring and the decisions we make. If we bring a sense of scarcity, a sense of there's not enough to do all the things we want to do, then our budget becomes the biggest mission statement that we make. Because what we're willing to spend our scarce resources on, well, that tells the world, people out there, a lot about who we are. If we come to view money as in the church as, you know what, we got lots of it, and we're living in abundance, then we'll see that reflected in the budget of the congregation. That attitude. Yeah, we can do big stuff because we've got an abundance. I want to suggest that, and I've been guilty of this, talking about kind of the theology of abundance, and then that theology got kind of corrupted, and it became what in some congregations became the theology of prosperity, and everybody said, well, if you're a good Christian, you're going to become rich. Isn't that great? And the New Age religion said, well, if you put out positive things about money, it'll come back to you, and you'll have a sense of prosperity. So I'm kind of out of favor right now with the sense, that concept of abundance. And I think in the world that we live in and in the context in which we find ourselves, that what we need to develop and create in our congregation is a theology of enough. We have enough to do those things that are vitally important to us. We have enough to take on some strong way of helping other people. We've been going for 140 years, maybe more. And each generation of leadership has found out that they have enough to meet what they need to do in order to sustain a healthy, vibrant church. And I think that we can trust ourselves and our own resilience to say that when we see the needs that God is presenting to us, we have enough to meet them, to face the future. The Good Samaritan story that was read, right? The Good Samaritan, he hadn't budgeted to meet somebody who had been beaten and left for dead in the ditch. He didn't know that was going to happen. But he tended the wounds. He picked up the guy, put him on his donkey, or whatever he was riding, took him to the closest inn, and then he paid the bill. He said, "Take care of this guy." He had enough to do that. I come now into kind of ministry with this sense that's been borne out over the years that I've worked in ministry, that when a congregation is actually looking at the world in which we live and the community around us and saying, this is the people who are in danger of falling into the ditch, and we have enough to help. Money has always followed mission. It's always followed ministry. So, I got to wind it up. But if I could ask, convince, persuade, it would be that we first say, what is the need that we want to do, that we want to respond to? And then we say, yeah, we'll have enough to do it. Because that's actually the way it's always been. For more than 2,000 years, God's people have had enough to make a positive difference in the lives of the people that they have tried to help. And sure, we have made mistakes, but we have also done some tremendous good. So, money as a spiritual practice for you and I individually, but money as a spiritual practice for this congregation. Well, it's not a complete thought, it's not a complete sentence, but I leave you with it to think about it and to imagine. And to hear yourself start to move from, we don't have money for that, to, well, we have enough to help that person. Well, thanks for listening and thanks for ruminating on this in the coming week.